Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, March 10th, 2025, and our friend Professor Ted Postol is back with us. Welcome back, Ted.
So it's nice to be back. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, as always. Ted, let's get started with the new administration in the United States. So far, how did you find Donald Trump and the way that he's dealing with Ukraine?
Well, I have to say, probably there's nobody more surprised than me. I quite honestly expected a royal disaster. Uh, I think I think he's heading for a royal disaster domestically in the United States with what he's doing. But in his attempts at dealing with the Ukraine situation, I would say at the moment, maybe at the moment, it's flawless. It's really he's doing very well. Initially, he did some things that I think were very ill-advised and were pretty much what I was afraid he would do. For example, he threatened the Russians with all kinds of sanctions and military actions, and just do it. I'm a tough guy, that kind of thing. And they reacted, quite frankly, appropriately. They just said, don't talk to us this way. We're serious. If you're not going to be serious, we're not going to deal with you. And uh, to his credit, he has stepped back, and he's let his foreign policy team handle the matters. And from my point of view, which is essentially I share the objectives they have laid out for themselves. In fact, I would have never suggested these objectives because, in some sense, they were so forward looking, I would not have thought that the U.S. government was capable of coming forward with such an idea. But their objective is to normalize relations with Russia, both in the nuclear field, the nuclear weapons field, and in commercial and enterprise areas as well. And I would say if they can succeed, I'm concerned they won't, but that's another, well, that's a discussion we can have. Not necessarily because of them, but because of resistance that is quite serious. If they succeed, I would say that they are greatly in increasing the chances that we will get to the 22nd century without having destroyed ourselves in an accidental nuclear war of some kind. I don't think anyone is going to initiate a nuclear war willingly and knowingly, but I think there is ample possibility of mistakes and escalation chains that could readily lead to the destruction of modern civilization. So I do not think that this is a time of safety. I think it's a time of great danger, and it continues to be a time of great danger for many reasons. But one of them has to do with the extraordinary behavior of the French and British leadership with regard to U.S. normalizing relations with Russia. I mean, the Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, he looks like he's deranged to me. I mean, it's hard to believe that he has advisors and no one is able to explain to him basic facts. But I'm sure that there are people around him who can tell him basic facts, but it looks like he's not one of these people who ever listens or uses his advisors. I mean, that's the way it appears to me. And Macron, he's just gone berserk too. I mean, offering to make France the nuclear bulwark against Russia. And I mean, if a French nuclear weapon ever went off on detonated on Russian territory, France would look like a radioactive glass parking lot in a Russian response. Why would you endanger your country as a leader this way? Why would you do this when you have no chance of doing anything substantive in a military way that could in any way influence the outcome here? The war is lost. There's nothing France or Great Britain could do. Neither of them have anything close to the military forces needed. They've been trying to get the United States, trying to basically mousetrap in the most, I think, insulting ways, mousetrap, Trump and his staff into backing a European NATO force, a peacekeeping force in Ukraine, which the Russians will never allow, never agree to, and he wants, these two guys are trying to, along with Zelensky, have been trying to, somehow fool Trump into taking on this, agreeing to this responsibility. And he's not taking the bait. I mean, it's, but in some sense, it's, I don't know whether if I were on Trump's team, I would be insulted by the heavy-handedness of what they're, how they're trying. We're trying to do this, or I think what I would actually do is I just write them off as total idiots. Sometimes when somebody does something to you and your reaction is that this is insulting, it's really a reflection of their understanding of the world, not necessarily their understanding of you. And they look totally incompetent and dangerously so for their own countries. So I think the situation is well underhand by Trump's team, in that they're indicating to the Russians that they want to normalize relations with Russia. And the Russians seem to understand that they intend to do this, that that's what they want to do. The Russians are being cautious because for absolutely valid reasons, they're not sure that the American team will be able to come through with its current desired intentions, not necessarily because of a lack of competence, because I think the team has handled itself in a very competent way. But I think the problem is they're facing so much reaction against what they're trying to do, not only from the European leadership, mainly, of course, France and Great Britain, UK, but also from the American leadership, many people in Congress. I don't know what these people have against peace. I mean, why would you want war over peace? And it's not like Russia is the Soviet Union, which posed a significant ideological threat that could have led to actions and reactions that could have inadvertently led to war or direct conflict. This is a country now, Russia is now a country that has no ideological differences with the West, none that I can see. It's a socialist, capitalist country, mixed capital and socialism, just as the West is. You could argue it's not as democratic as the West. I'm actually not even sure of that anymore when I look at the way the West has manipulated its press. as long as your population doesn't sit in fear that the police are going to knock down their door and come into their house and arrest them, then you have at least the foundations of civil society. Maybe not civil, maybe not true democracy, but that seems to be the case in Russia. It's not the case in Ukraine. You make the mistake of suggesting that this war is a problem. You're going to get arrested in Ukraine. This nonsense that Ukraine is somehow a democratic state is ridiculous. It's a totalitarian state. People do not have the right to speak their minds. You can be arrested on the street and pulled into the army if you're in a wide age category. You'll have almost no recourse if one of these thug groups pick you off the street, and that's almost a death sentence given what's happening at the front at this point. So how can anybody who is responsible and knowledgeable call Ukraine a democracy? We see people doing it, but they're either totally ill-informed and or liars, and in some cases it's both. But so I think the situation is potentially very constructive if the Trump team can pull it off. And now, at the moment, if one steps back and looks at the situation with regard to nuclear weapons, the entire structure of control over nuclear weapons, which was painstakingly put in place in the latter half of the 20th century, has now been completely eliminated. We have no arms control agreements or understandings that reduce the chances of accidental war or constrain the size of these arsenals, which still could be grown to much larger and more dangerous levels. That's all disappeared. The key decision point where that began was in 2002 with the elimination of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. It's let me just take a second for your audience, because if I take a second and explain a few things, they'll know more than the people in the Biden White House understood, and the Obama White House, which is a pretty sad statement about the American government. The ABM Treaty of 1972 being the time when it was finalized and signed, basically says in very plain language, people can look it up and you'll see in its preamble, that the purpose of this treaty is to limit missile defenses, because missile defenses pose an apparent threat to the counterstrike capabilities of the other side's nuclear forces. And because they have this appearance, even though they may not perform very well. In fact, there are no missile defenses today or at that time that had any chance of performing at any level of meaningful function. So they were. That's an underlying assumption that led, understanding that led both sides to come to decide to enter such a treaty, because they both realized that they couldn't defend themselves no matter what they tried to do technologically. So, but they both also agreed and understood that that having a defense creates uncertainties from the point of view of the offense, especially with regard to retaliation, that would tend to drive each side to want to expand their arsenals in response to the uncertainties produced by these defenses. So they agreed that they would limit these defenses to overtly limited capabilities, small numbers of interceptors, radars, and supporting systems, so that even a monkey could do the arithmetic and see they could not in any way ever contribute to eliminating or reducing the ability for one side to strike the other, especially after it was struck first. So the ABM treaty performs a profound function in both limiting the pressures for building defenses, and perhaps even more importantly, even though it doesn't, it's not a treaty on, it's not an offensive limitation treaty. It removes pressures to expand arsenals beyond what what sizes and capabilities they already have. And so the ABM treaty is critical as part of arms limitations, maintaining nuclear arsenals on both sides that are not so large and so threatening that each side will react negatively and expand the size of their arsenals. And the result being that an arms race will occur, numbers of weapons become larger, chances for accidents that could lead to an unwanted nuclear exchange are raised. So the whole idea is to lower the level of tension in general. Well, this treaty was eliminated in 2002 by the George W. Bush administration, and it opened the door to a great disaster. And the Russians were very upset about it. I don't know if they were more upset than I was, but because I was really upset about it. Incidentally, I saw this coming for quite a while because the Clinton administration was playing with the ABM treaty too before. So the Democrats, this has been a bipartisan activity. People need to understand, and I'm talking now to the liberal Democrats who think of themselves as so liberal and so above it all and so superior to those troglodyte Republicans that only the Republicans could have done something like this. This is not the case. The Democrats have played a big role in this, and I could go through a litany of this. So this has been a bipartisan activity, and it happened in 2002, finally. Then we had in 2019 a reckless withdrawal from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. That was done by Trump, which is one of the reasons why I'm stunned that Trump is now doing all the right things. And I'm very hopeful that in this process that he and his team have started, we will get back the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty as well. Nothing has been said about this. I want to be clear, because the big thing right now is just normalize relations. And I think that's the right sequence of events. But I'm very hopeful that if this thing moves forward, we will reinstate the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Now, the Russians have not deployed intermediate nuclear forces in response to the U.S. withdrawal from the treaty. They have been very restrained. The United States had not done anything as well, except we've announced that in 2026, the Biden administration announced that they want to put, and the Germans agreed, that they want to put intermediate missiles into Germany. Now, they didn't call them nuclear, but that's just one of the lies that is commonly done by the U.S. government to deceive its own population about what it intends to do. These missiles could have no material military capability unless they're nuclear. So these will be nuclear missiles, in spite of the lack of, oh, I forgot to tell you by the, oh, you want the tires on that car? I didn't know that. It's that kind of thing. So, so, so we're talking about a significant escalation going back to the very dangerous time of the that occurred when the right before the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty was put in place, and we came very close to an accidental nuclear war in Europe in 1983, and I'm putting together a talk on that subject, incidentally, if sometime you want to waste your viewers' time listening to it. But it was serious. Thousands of nuclear warheads would have detonated on Germany alone. Germany would have looked like a radioactive glass parking lot if that had occurred. We know this. We have data, and I would show this. I'm planning on showing this when I put this talk together. So we have, real gaming experience that shows how quickly and how badly and how absolutely unconstrained an escalation could occur, literally within a few days, to result in the destruction of the entire modern civilization. And that was an exercise that the United States was involved in. So putting those missiles back into Germany and Germany accepting it is the height of recklessness. It is hard for me to understand how any member of the German leadership who knows anything, who understands the history of what this situation looked like in 1983, would want to reinstate this kind of dangerous situation in Middle Europe. I mean, it's just, and in fact, I'll be in Germany in March giving a talk about this, because I don't think the average German political leader understands what they're getting into. And part of my main reason for this German talk is to talk just about this, which is why I'm putting together this talk. So, so we also had in 2020, just a year later, a withdrawal from the Open Skies Treaty, which allowed both sides to fly over each other and monitor military activities. That was also done by the Trump administration, and the Russians. We withdrew in November 2020, but the Russians waited till December of 2021 to finally withdraw, because they have been very restrained. The Russians want to have these treaties. They are very well thought out. They understand why these treaties are important. The United States has no longer people in government who understand these things. So I've had a conversation with this guy, Mike McFall, who is among the most astonishingly ignorant people who claim to be experts on national security. And I've tried to understand. I can't get him to explain to me how he thought the Russian reset in 2009 would have been accepted by the Russians as a step forward. What happened in 2009, we claimed to have this reset under Hillary Clinton, who I might add seems to be as ignorant of the issues as McFall is, and he implemented these great ideas of Clinton and Obama. I'd also add, and I don't think anybody in the White House understood what they were doing, because they proposed the Aegis missile defense system. Now, if anybody understood the ABM Treaty of 1972, if you knew the treaty, I used to teach classes on the treaty. My classes usually focused on weapon systems because I was trying to explain to people how weapons work. But of course, I also spent time on the critical political aspects of this. And I had several very detailed classes on the ABM treaty itself. And one of the things that, if you knew the treaty and knew how it was designed, you would have understood, and Mike McFaul should have understood this. If he is not an analyst, if he didn't understand, and these guys were in the White House, was that mobile missile defenses were a very, very escalatory problem that the ABM treaty finally banned. You can say the treaty no longer existed in 2009. That would be correct. But if you understood how the treaty had been designed, you would have known that the most provocative thing the United States could possibly have done was to deploy a mobile missile defense system like Aegis. It would be the most provocative thing you could do. And the reason is very simple. The problem with a mobile system is, in theory, you could choose to defend a location that you decide about in the last minute that the adversary doesn't really know about. And you could, in theory, defend some area of interest. It could be a national capital, but it could be a reserve, reserve command location. It could be, there are all kinds of things you could do to in principle, preferentially defend areas that an adversary would not be able to retaliate against if the defense worked. Now, of course, there's an important caveat: if the defense worked. Now, the Aegis system is a joke. It has no chance of working at all. But the Russians cannot assume that at some future time the United States won't figure out some way to make it somewhat better. And once you have the base out there, the time it takes to improve the base may be smaller than the time it takes to build countermeasures. I actually don't think that's the case, but if you're Vladimir Putin, you're the leader of a country. You're not Ted Postol. I'm an analyst. I don't have the responsibility on my shoulders of guaranteeing the survival of my country. So he's going to, even though he's appears to me to be as well informed on this subject as any leader can be, I understand why he is uncertain. And I also understand why he is uncertain, because I think when I very carefully listen to Putin, I take him very seriously. When I very carefully listen to his statements about nuclear retaliation, my overwhelming impression is that he is not concerned that these defenses could work. He is concerned that an American president could be so ill-informed that the American president could think that they work, do something that requires a Russian retaliation, thereby resulting in the destruction of both countries. In other words, he is worried about the ignorance of an American political decision maker more than he's worried about the capabilities of the defenses. I believe that is absolutely his concern. That's my belief, based on listening extremely carefully to nuances in his statements about the capabilities of these defenses. And he doesn't, I really think that's his fear. And frankly, I share that fear. I meet someone, again, I use Mike McFaul because I happen to know him. Here's a guy who knows nothing. He was ambassador to Russia. He never. I mean, it's a travesty that Obama would have made such a clown an ambassador. I mean, that's the most important diplomatic appointment that the United States makes, the Foreign Service makes. But we've had very serious people in that job before him. I mean, it's just a joke. And when you look at the what this guy knows and understood, there's no. I can understand exactly why the Russians were very concerned when he was there. And of course, they saw him in 2009 selling this Aegis system because he was Clinton's right-hand person. So he put this Aegis ashore system. He was selling this system in 2009, this strike system parading as a missile defense. The problem with Aegis ashore is that it is the Aegis missile launching system put on a ground on land rather than on a ship. There are no modifications to the system. So the system on a ship is designed to be able to launch offensive missiles as well as defensive missiles. It's a brilliantly clever design to allow a ship, which is limited in its volume and capacity, to carry all kinds of different missiles with a single launch designed system, launching system. So the canisters for carrying missiles could carry a 3,000 kilometer range nuclear armed cruise missile, or an anti-aircraft missile, or an anti-submarine missile, or a short range anti-aircraft missile for shorter range engagements. It has all this flexibility built into it. Well, they just took that and put it on land. So how are the Russians supposed to know that this system that's carrying a pathetic anti-ballistic missile interceptor, an interceptor that's so pathetic that anybody who looks at it from a purely technical point of view, without any politics in your head, would say this cannot be the real purpose of this system? I mean, I don't know if it is the real purpose or not, but if you looked at this system as a technical person understanding the system's capabilities, you would say the only useful purpose for this system is to launch cruise missiles, nuclear armed cruise missiles against Russia. And if you put a well-designed ballistic missile into those canisters, even though the range of a ballistic missile is constrained by the volume of the canister, you could launch ballistic missiles that could carry a warhead that would be a threat to Moscow in those canisters too. So why wouldn't the Russians say this looks like an offensive system? And if the political leadership of the United States believes the nonsense that they said, that they told the Russians, why wouldn't the Russians say to themselves, these people are dangerous? They either don't know what they're talking about. I mean, the best I can say is that they have no idea what they're talking about, and they're threatening us with an offensive system that could instantly be a threat to us. And if they believe what they're telling us, they're totally ignorant. You can't depend on them. And if they don't believe, they're liars. So what are you supposed to do if you're a Russian leader like Vladimir Putin? Then he faces the realities of what the United States did in its negotiations with Russia. The Minsk II agreement was a farce. The Russians negotiated it in good faith, and the U.S. negotiated it in bad faith. The U.S. negotiated Minsk II by the idea of the U.S. negotiation in Minsk II was to delay the Russians from understanding that we were trying to pump as many NATO weapons into Ukraine as possible to create a fact on the ground that the Russians couldn't deal with. We were just trying, it was a ploy. It had nothing to do with diplomacy. Well, this is like cheating on your wife and telling her you're honest. And when she finds out, what is she going to believe about you after that? I mean, this is the ultimate betrayal, and so what is Putin supposed to do? He says, I can't trust these people even in a negotiation. In a diplomatic negotiation, they will knowingly lie to me and use the diplomatic process to try to weaken me militarily. That's what they were up to. And then, of course, we all know about the Istanbul agreement being torpedoed by the United States and the UK. And so when you're Russia looking at the situation now, you're saying to yourself, any agreement I reach with the Trump administration is going to have to be absolutely airtight. I'm not going to let some interim peacekeeping forces come into Ukraine. What they'll do is they'll use those peacekeeping forces to reinforce Ukraine, which is now on the ropes. Ukraine has lost the war now. Do you want to give Ukraine the West and Ukraine a few years to reinforce the situation so they can come back at Russia and again claim that they're going to join NATO and pose a nuclear threat on Russia's border? Russians are not going to do that. They said, fool me once, fool me twice, that's it. We're not doing that. So I think that and I say this with sympathy, incidentally, that the Trump team has a very difficult job ahead of it. And I don't say this with any hostility. I think they understand that. I don't know the other members of the team, but I do know Tulsi Gabbard, and she is incredibly smart and has all the right instincts. When I just from having interacted with her, her instincts are just the right ones as far as I'm concerned, and she will understand the situation. Now the question is how much maneuver will they have, and that will depend, of course, on Trump's ability to control the Congress with regard to any agreements that are reached to normalize in the normalization with Russia. And I hope that we will get more sensible thinking in the American Congress than we have so far seen. And frankly, the Democrats are the biggest problem now. This is a party. I guess I'm still I don't know if I'm a Democrat or not. I have been a Democrat traditionally. The Democrats are a party of war at this time. I mean, it's shameless what they're doing. And these people are not thinking. I mean, what you want to do, I don't get a chance to talk to these people because they're too busy talking to each other, and they only talk to each other because they're all geniuses. But you ask, why would you want a war with Russia? I mean, what would be the purpose? Russia is not an expansionist threat to the West. They're trying to claim that. They take a 1.5 million soldier army, which Russia does not yet have but will have, because they have stated what their objective is, has no chance of posing an invasion threat to Western Europe. None at all. Anybody who looks at the facts, the historical facts of how the Russians have tried to negotiate with Ukraine to keep them out of NATO and to keep American military bases and nuclear armed missiles away from Russia's borders, which is the objective that the Russians had, that forced them, not they did, it wasn't unprovoked, but forced them to decide that they had to go into Ukraine. And they went into Ukraine not to defeat Ukraine, but to force the Ukrainians to negotiate. And in 7 days, within a few days, 6 days, within 1 day, actually, they were already negotiating. Zelensky was scared into negotiating with Putin. And within 1 day, there was a negotiating activity began. Within a week or so, there was the beginnings of an understanding. By the end of March, they had a treaty, the shape of a treaty that both sides had signed, and it didn't need to be a war beyond what happened. And the United States didn't accept that. Joe Biden, who has the blood of 1 million dead and injured Ukrainians on his hands, it's Joe Biden's hands. Americans won't like what I'm saying, and I'm sure I'm going to be attacked for this. But let me tell you, Joe Biden is responsible for the death and misery of 1 million Ukrainians who have been either killed or horribly injured in life-changing injuries on the battlefield from the battlefield, all on his hands. And as far as I can tell, he doesn't even understand that. Forget about all the murder in Gaza that's been going on, that he also shares responsibility for. He thinks, and I think he actually thinks this, that he's going to go down as one of the great American presidents. I mean, he said enough things while he was in office. And he's going to go down as one of the absolute worst, most dangerous, most reckless American presidents. And he has some competition in that area because George W. Bush was no great shakes. And Bill Clinton did a lot of really bad things for the stability of the world by starting this NATO expansion. He also did some really bad things for American internal stability, eliminating constraints on banks that led to the 2009 economic disaster. And he's got some. So Mr. Biden has some real competition for bad presidents in the most recent crew of presidents we've had. But he's going to be at the head of the list. That's my guess at this point. So what should we do? What should the objectives? Incidentally, I think that this is already understood by Tulsi Gabbard. I don't want to. I want to, But what do I think? And I haven't talked to her, but my guess is she would agree completely. First of all, they should do what they're saying they want to do: normalize trade relations with Russia and start putting together a plan for reducing the number of nuclear weapons on both sides. I think reducing the number by 2 is an ambitious goal, but why not? The world would still be destroyed with half the number of weapons if we lost control of them. So choose 2 and aim at that. I think part of this plan could be very good for domestic American policy because we Americans have plans to spend well over $1 trillion in modernizing our nuclear forces. Well, we don't need to spend that money if we decide, we have to spend some money to modernize forces so that they're reliable, so that we don't have accidents, so that they're manned by responsibly trained and capable people. That we need to do, and that's expensive. But we don't need to modernize. We don't need to buy new fleets of bombers, B-21 bombers. That's crazy. We don't need to keep all these B-52s. We don't need all these land-based ICBMs, new ICBMs. So we could save a boatload of money by basically going to a sea-based force. Now, there are problems with the sea-based force that I did not foresee. I was a big advocate for sea-based forces as early as the 1970s because if you can't find them, you can't attack them. And if you can't attack them, you don't preemptively strike. So I thought of them as very stabilizing. And what I didn't anticipate, to be absolutely candid, is that the American Trident would become so capable as a strike force. It would have such a combination of accuracy and yield that it could really eliminate land-based missiles of Russia in a first strike. And that's a destabilizing factor that I think we should eventually try to deal with. I think there are ways of making the Trident force less threatening, and with the given the limitations that the Russians would have in reducing their forces. But I don't. I that's a discussion for the future if we ever get that far. But basically, going to a sea-based force that would have overwhelmingly more strike power than the other forces combined. In other words, you give up the bombers and the ICBMs, and you'd have more strike power than you would keep more strike power than you lose. Doing that. So I think it would be a very good idea to modernize the U.S. forces by just doing what we need to do to maintain the submarines and tridents and just not wasting all this money on these other forces. And we should definitely reinstate the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. We do not need, all we will do is create a flashpoint that could quickly escalate into a large-scale global nuclear exchange in Europe, from Europe. And there's no benefit to it. Why would we do it? The Russians are not invading. They're not going to invade Europe in spite of all this nonsense. Just look at the numbers. Prime Minister, Starmer, open your eyes, get a briefing from some colonel. You don't even need a general. Let them explain to you what the Russian forces look like. Open your eyes. Be responsible. Be a responsible leader. Understand what kind of threat there is, conventional threat there is to the UK, to Western Europe. Stop inventing threats and then putting together escalating, dangerous arguments that would, tend to mislead people into believing you have to do incredibly dangerous and escalatory things that could bring about an accident that could, end civilization as we know it. There's no reason to do any of this. We are in a situation where we could have peace if people only inform themselves. It's I don't know what these people read, or if they read, or how can you believe what they're saying? And I don't understand how you could not believe, how you could want a war with Russia when I can see no benefit to a war. You can't defeat them. They've shown you that they have the military capacity to defend themselves much better than anything. They've defeated us absolutely unambiguously. We lost. I was in Vietnam on vacation. We were talking about this. And, I'm talking to this Vietnamese guy, very intelligent, very well informed. And I said, you beat us fair and square. And he kind of recoiled at first and said, wow, you're the first Americans that said that to me. I said, well, you did. You beat us. You kicked us out. And quite frankly, although I love my country and I support my country, we deserved it. You didn't deserve all the mess we made here before you kicked us out. That's my feeling about the Vietnam War. You had all these people in our government, the best and the brightest, all these Harvard-educated guys. I'm only an MIT-educated guy. You have to excuse me. I don't understand these subtle things, unlike the Stanford-educated guys I also deal with. But there's no reason for a war. There's no conflict for a war. We do have a situation where the rest of the world is rising at a fantastic rate as commercial competitors to the United States. It will be they call it a multipolar world, but I think it's actually not polar. It's just a developed world. It's a fully developed world. It's becoming a fully developed world. And a fully developed world is filled with nation states that can take care of themselves. And how is that bad? Unless they start attacking each other. Then that's really bad because we have the wealth to really kill each other on a very large scale. We have the
How about what Ambassador Chas Freeman is talking about? He's talking about multinodal war.
a multi. Yeah, I think Chaz is right.
Yeah.
I mean, Chaz is, I couldn't agree more with. I saw you and Chaz on along with Larry Wilkerson, who I also admire greatly, and I agree with both of them on that. And I think there's reason for tremendous optimism about the future of humanity if humanity's leaderships behave properly, behave sanely. First of all, the population is now not predicted to grow out of control. The global population is expected to stabilize and then come down as states modernize. People will have less incentive to have oversized families because they won't have such loss of life, which is a misery that nobody should have to put up with. And so if the population stabilizes to a more manageable level, and the technology brings us to a level where people can live with dignity, how can that be a bad outcome? But if we don't stabilize this relationship between Russia and the United States, we're in trouble. And we also, when we stabilize this relationship between Russia and the United States, let's not forget that we should include China. China's expanding its forces now, and I don't think it was a good choice for China to expand its forces, but I understand why they made that choice because I have enough contact with the Chinese. I'm sure what happened is the political leadership in China, incidentally, there was a lot of pushback in China because I know a lot of people Chinese who think it was a bad idea. I know a lot of Chinese, including me. I'm not Chinese, obviously, but I know why the political leadership chose to expand their forces because they saw that restraint was getting them nowhere. The big thing to say, oh, the only thing that Putin knows is force. Oh, well, the only thing the United States knows is force. And the Chinese leadership just sat down and said, look, we can't put up with this bullying anymore. And, when I first was in China in the 90s, they were talking, all of my colleagues, all of the political people I was, including the conservative military people I was talking with, were reflecting the thinking of the leadership. I'm sure they were, because why would they? And the leader was we're not going to spend a lot of money on military enterprise. That was the attitude in the 1990s. We're going to cut that stuff back. We're going to really work on growing the economy. Of course, nobody could predict they would be so successful. And my guess is, I actually think I'm very likely correct in this, is that the political leadership succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, which good for them is my reaction. And they said, now the United States is threatening us militarily. It's not enough to compete with us commercially. They're trying to instigate a war with us. And, we can't put up with this. This is not acceptable. And we have all this wealth that we didn't expect to have. We were aiming at, but we suddenly succeeded beyond our best expectations. So, okay, it would be better to spend it getting 4 times the production capability of the United States rather than the 3 times we already have. But we can't put up with this bullying and this pushing us around. And it's clear we need to be a major nuclear weapon state for those damn Americans to start respecting us. That's what I think happened. So we were the guys who, only understood power, military power, not the Putins and the Xi Jinpings, you know, not them. They were the guys who were forced to make decisions that they would otherwise have chosen not to do in favor of growing their economies and improving the lives of their citizens because they just couldn't put up with being pushed around, having nuclear weapons put on their borders, having American bases put on their borders, something that we almost went to war over in 1962. But it's okay for us, but it's not okay for Russia, and it's okay for the Chinese, but it's not okay for the United States. That's what's happened here. So I think we have to recognize that the capacity of the Chinese to build a major nuclear force comparable to that of the United States and Russia is well within their grasp, especially if we are going to be reducing the numbers of Russian and American warheads. So we better start thinking about working with the Chinese directly as well. And this pivot to the Pacific, I'm very reserved about it. And I think we need to start thinking about how to compete in a peaceful, commercial way with the Chinese and with the Russians. But China, of course, is the gigantic commercial enterprise relative to Russia. But Russia is a major, major military land power, and we ought to leave them alone. Let them develop a prosperous society for their people, and the idea that Western Europe should isolate itself from Russia is that I can't comprehend how anybody would think that's a good idea. I mean, the prosperity of Western Europe was based on cheap gas and oil from Russia, which, as an integrated part of Europe, could continue supplying this cheap gas and oil and allow Europe to continue its prosperity, unlike what has happened in the last few years to Europe. You have the European leadership demanding that its population support the deindustrialization and desocialization of their societies. Because if they start putting vast amounts of money into militarizing, all that money is going to go away from all these wonderful social programs that they have in Europe. I have an adopted daughter in Europe. I love the social support she has in Germany. I think it's a wonderful place to live. And she's going to suffer. Her child is going to suffer, my adopted grandchild. All these wonderful Germans I met through her are going to suffer. For what? For a military confrontation that does not need to happen, like this Ukraine war did not need to happen. It's so unwise. It's hard to understand how anybody could have a straight face and make an argument for it. And yet this is what is going on now. So I'm cautiously optimistic that the Trump foreign policy team can do something. My concern, quite frankly, is that Trump is his domestic activities, some of which are not as bad as people are making it out to be, but still, he's disrupting. His people are disrupting things in a way that I think goes well beyond reform. And I think some of the reforms he's talking about are actually quite sensible. But going in with a meat axe and just hammering away at civil servants, and I think that's a very dangerous thing to do. And the result, and all these tariffs, the result is going to be that the inflation is going to rise, which has already been a problem. which contributed substantially to Biden's losing or the Democrats losing. It's gonna rise given these tariff walls. Um, Trump is going to need to increase taxes on the most rich people. If he does what he did in his first term, he will increase the American debt. The United States right now is riding on a fairy tale of a cloud. You know, we have all this debt. We have we just happened by accident right at the moment. We have the world's reserve currency, so we can float all this debt. That is changing dramatically. In fact, Joe Biden, the BRICS people should, create a giant statue for Joe Biden, who greatly increased the growth rate of BRICS. I mean, he should be the father of BRICS, the George Washington of BRICS, because he just showed the rest of the world that you cannot depend on the United States. The United States will go berserk, having such a dominant control over the world's reserve currency. You're going to have to do something about it. And now that process is well going on. Once the movement begins, it's not going to stop. The idea that all of a sudden we're going to behave nicely, the Americans, are going to behave nicely, you can't depend on the Americans if you're an independent foreign state. Who's going to be the next president? What are they going to do next? This country, we have a Congress that doesn't impose constraints on presidents. The presidents are powerful beyond what our Constitution allows them to be, but that's because we have a Congress that's not doing its job, and that's a real problem. And when you're a foreign nation and you're informed, I mean, I have all kinds of friends who are involved in the leadership of foreign nations. Every one of them knows the American system better than the average American citizen, because we are the dog that wags the tail, but the tail is going to start to wag the dog very shortly, and it's going to be a big shock. And I think Trump understands that. He doesn't understand how to change this. I think how to stop it. I think his measures are actually likely to accelerate it, at least at this time. I think acceptance would be a very good thing on the part of American leadership. In other words, accept the fact that the world is becoming rich and industrialized generally, and that's a good thing. Populations will hopefully become less out of control. The technologies will help us keep the environments under control, and so we can move into the 22nd century as a humanity that's prosperous and has a future for a long time. Right now, I'm 50-50 we make it to the 22nd century, is my guess.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up. Let's see what Donald Trump is capable of doing. But it's so optimistic so far, the way he's talking about denuclearization and the talk between the United States and Russia. And let's see what would happen.
Yeah, I agree. And they're doing the right thing. But you have a lot of the Western political leadership. They're out of their heads. And the American Congress is not much better. And the Democratic Party is out of control. These people, they're just out of control. And but I'm still waiting for Senator Mark Kelly to answer my emails I sent to him, incidentally, about the statements he made about my misinformation to Tulsi Gabbard about nerve agent attacks in Syria. Maybe he wants to celebrate, maybe Senator Kelly wants to celebrate the new government in Syria, the new stable government that is murdering people all over the place now. A predicted outcome. So it's a dangerous situation still. And we need to educate. We need an educated Congress that's honest. We can have our disagreements, but unless our Congress does its job, we will continue to have out of control presidencies that will do dangerous things that not only affect the United States domestically in an adverse way, it will continue to affect the whole world, because we will remain a great power for the foreseeable future. We may not be the only great power, and that's fine with me, but we will remain a great power, and we can do a lot of bad things if we don't get our act together. So I'm all for good government in the United States.
Thank you so much, Ted, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Well, I'll wait for the hate mail.
No, nothing of that sort.
Yes. Well,
see you soon, Ted. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was always a pleasure talking with you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.